consult and solving short-term problems is great, but that doesn't give us the real fundamental innovation. So you need this kind of longer-term overlap. More porous structure so you can accommodate this is another key thing. Basically, more involvement from the outside world. And remember I said with the exception of online education, what's interesting, and that's why it's going to be such a huge thing, is that the three elements of innovation in education a university does have. So the university itself can actually be like Bell Labs in the edX, MITx game. So that's a very exciting point. So I want to end with, again, we have to remember that this idea that the nation state invests in R&D and it creates growth to lift standard of living for all people was really introduced in the 1930s, first in a defense context by a guy named Vannevar Bush. And if you come to MIT, the building 13, which is the building I'm in, it's the Vannevar Bush building. People forget that because everybody knows the numbers at MIT. They don't pay attention to the names, right? But the building 13, Vannevar Bush, is famous because he said we have to invest in R&D for defense purposes, and then World War II came around, and a lot of things he started in the 30s, which most people don't realize, remember the 10 or 15 year delay, came to fruition just in time to help in World War II, right? And then after the war, he said, let's do the same thing because it helped defense, it's gonna help commerce. If we invest into research and development, especially in the universities, that'll help commerce, right? And of course in the US that actually happened. So he wrote a book, a paper, a very important paper in the United States. All these ideas he called it the endless frontier because innovation never stops. That every time people think that all the ideas are done, the truth is there's another thing that comes up, right? And so he called it the endless frontier, and I want to describe to you in there how we describe the engineer. And this is very instructive. He said that the engineer was not primarily a physicist or a businessman or an inventor, but someone who would acquire some of the skills and knowledge of each of these and be capable of successfully developing and applying new devices on a grand scale. So that's 1942, right? So you see what I had to do today is that person I have to call the innovator today, because we have, in modern times through the specialization thing I talked about, made the engineer sort of a technical person, right? But look at 1942, the people that created this whole wave, the people that created a lot of growth in the United States, right? It's a hybrid person, right? So we'll call it an innovator today. I hope that's motivating for you guys, and that in Thailand you can take these principles and just like, history has shown, individuals can matter, groups of individuals matter, and universities can matter, and you can affect corporations and the future of Thailand. So hopefully that's motivating, and I'll stop there, and I'd like to take any questions that you might have for me.
Not too far from your university in Cambridge, there is one renowned strategist, Professor Potter, who came up with the famous theory of the 5 forces. You know which university I'm referring to. So my question is, and then, okay, back to the Michael Porter. After a few years, after he came up with his theory, he added the 6 forces, the 7 forces into his theory. So coming back to your three components of the basic innovation, if you were to add just one more component into the 3 components that you already have, what would that component be?
Well, of course, if I knew that, then I would put it in there.
The most likely one.
I should tell you our philosophy over this model is that remember I said I want to make it simple enough that you can communicate it to a large number of different kinds of people. but at the same time capture every situation, right? And so what I would do, and I've done this before, is people ask, well, what about this, what about that? Generally, you can always put whatever the question is about, you can put it into one of those three elements, right? Especially since we made implementation, which almost captures everything but the other two categories by definition, right? So it's kind of built basically to not let people make it more complex, right? And so, I think one of the things that people will always ask about, if you look at me giving these lectures, they'll ask about capital and all this sort of thing. What I was calling before the nutrients, right? And you can look at that two ways. I put it into the category of implementation, in terms of that and market in the following way. Implementation, we put cost in there, right? And then, market application is price, right? So the market application category is where we put price. And what that means is that, finance comes in and that, this innovation inherently assumes what I was doing, assumes that, if you're doing this innovation processes in one of those, in different organizations, that, your cost of capital, your financing allows it to go forward, right? So that would be the one thing that I think is buried in there, but a lot of people want to separate that out. But I think the reason I don't want to do that is that takes away from the human process of innovating, because that's just one factor. Like I said, price is a factor in market, and cost is in implementation. And the assumption is that whatever stage you're in, you're able to move forward through finance, right? So finance is one of the probably the portions. But again, I purposely don't really want to put that in there, because then it dominates everybody's thinking. Because this is the process that you have to do, converge on innovation, and that you have to assume you're going to get the nutrients that you want. So that's basically, it's the nutrients that are not there, right? Directly. Yes?
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Salil. I'm an applied researcher on the practice of sustainability. You did mention, and it fascinated me when you took these terms, tree, soil, water, and sun. So it highly converges with what I'm trying to do on sustainability. What would be your model of marketability, the technology, and the implementation? Because over the years, we have created enough e-waste. The Moore's law has sort of pushed innovation, and people have been using and throwing. So what would be the sort of anti-Moore's law here? Because time has come, these e-wastes are really impacting very much on water, the quality of water, on air, the quality of air, or
Okay.
even the land.
So now you want me to go through my water example, right?
If you may.
So I think what you're getting at is this whole field of how do you factor in? It's actually a simple thing, right? Which is, how do you factor in the environment into any of these activities, right? And in the United States, it is factored in through cost. So it appears in implementation. I think what most people don't realize in the United States is that the legal system, combined with environmental organizations, has embedded the cost, future cost related to environmentalism into products. So for example, there's lawsuits, right? And then, if it's a reasonable thing, it gets incorporated and the company has to do something. So if you compare the United States, you look at what we're doing in the 1950s to our water, streams and just dumping industrial waste and things like that, that's all stopped. If you look at the process, it's stopped through, added cost in products through the legal system, right? And so I'm not a US basher in terms of environmentalism, because I think the key metric is the sort of energy consumed per dollar of GDP. And of course, the US is by far the leader in that, which means that as the U.S. has grown, actually it says market forces force you to incorporate environmentalism into products, right? And because U.S., I won't pick on anybody, but I think we know the country that's absolutely the worst, right? There's one country that its sort of energy use per GDP is off the charts, and it's doing tons of environmental damage, right? But every time what happens is as a country advances and it gets more technology and it gets more innovation, the population demands that it actually be used. Now, do some countries have the legal system and other factors to create what's happened in the US in terms of the cost factor? Well, I would say this, that in innovation, to make this process run, the systems required in terms of economic freedom and organizational freedom, right? So if you're going to put those systems in place for a high rate of innovation, I think automatically the costs of damage to the environment get incorporated. And so I think they're tied. I think the more innovation you do, the more GDP that you get, with minimal energy use, right? And so I look at innovation as the key, because that's what you can see is each country that gets on the innovation. In other words, the GDP per person, as it goes up, the environmental control gets greater and greater, right? So that's a good thing, though. That's should offer hope. I'm not one of these people who runs around and says, oh my God, I gotta like flagellate myself or something. The truth is that innovation is the best solution for that, right? Now in water, just to show you how, if nobody minds me going on with this story, we started actually the water company based on the base of the pyramid. I don't know if you're familiar. It sounds like you're probably familiar with many years ago, people wrote about the opportunity at the base of the pyramid, which is that there's many, billions of people living at $1 or $2 a day around the world, and that they spend a huge percentage of their income on energy and water, basically. And so we started the company to address this problem in Mexico, right? And that was, we looked around the world, but basically this close to the United States, and huge problems in Mexico water in the Central Valley. Now, so what we did was we started with the BOP process, and our first products actually were based on that process. We put people on the ground in Mexico, and we had in the company excellent R&D people, so we could tell exactly what the problem was with the water, which is a huge thing, because if you just rely on local people to tell you, they don't really know, right? So we essentially created an innovation company of water, because what we do is we go into a region, we find out what the real problem is, and then we create a product that hits the price point that can sell there. And the reason that is that the Gates Foundation and all these foundations support a lot of these non-governmental organizations, NGOs, to do water work, but the truth is that you need a viable business to affect change, because, for example, we're now selling, by the end of the year, we would have sold 100,000 units into the Central Valley of Mexico. That is a far greater impact than any NGO has had ever in water, okay? And so, what we have to realize is that we have to get in there, find out what the real problem is, and then create a business model that creates profit so you can reinvest into the company. So then you can go to the next province or region in Mexico's case, and deploy more, right? And now one of the conflicts with BOP, and we had to change our business model. So this is where we were actually successful innovation. We had a product, and it's all what we were doing is. Right away, we assumed that we wanted to deploy point-of-view systems. And the reason was because the data on how fast governments can deploy municipal solutions for water was already known, right? And you clearly see that the market outstrips the ability for them to deploy centralized facilities. So that's our opportunity, and also how we can stop these people from drinking water that in the Central Valley, it was very high levels of arsenic. And so what you're essentially doing is poisoning the population and giving them cancer in the future, right? So what we did was we, found a way, and when we started, by the way, people said, as usual with any innovation, they said, you'll never solve that problem. They said, it's too difficult, the problem, don't work on it. We eventually found something and the technology and built the units, again, integrated design, like I was talking about, innovation, and the material actually that solved this problem cost $6 a pound. So, the idea that this is very complicated, what it required was this innovation process and knowledge to converge. And the problem with BOP is that we started with a model that we were selling directly to the consumers based on this idea that the people want it, but they don't have a lot of cash flow, right? So this gets down to business fundamentals. So I think all this new language about all this stuff still collapses the same business language from before. Because what happens is that if you look at implementation, the green, the business model, it'll work. But the problem is that the person doesn't have enough cash flow to buy the unit, right? So we have to finance the unit. And then, people talk about this theoretically, but we're actually doing it. I think we're the first company that really pushed this very far. And you become a finance company. If you look at the books of your company, what you're becoming when you follow the BOP model directly is you're becoming a finance company, because you have to get large amounts of capital in order to keep the business model. Now, the truth is true, in 10 years we make lots of money, right? But think about what that means. That means as a small company, and a small company is likely to do the innovation, right? My ability to become a finance company is the worst possibility in the world, right? Large companies are essentially finance companies, right? So my cost of capital is very high. So me buying units for people in Mexico, for a small company, makes no sense, right? So the BOP has a fundamental problem, which is the most innovative companies that are going to probably do this, right, are small to medium-sized companies, and yet they're not going to be able to finance people that make $1 or $2 a day, right? So we did, recognizing this, and it's very clear, by the way, just because we're doing the innovation process I talked about, we're seeing that we're essentially investing a lot of capital, and down the road we show lots of profit, but in the meantime we have to go through this huge dip, right? So we switched to a municipal business model where we realized the government needs to solve this problem, and they're collecting capital from the people anyway to solve this problem. And really, they're the ones supposed to be solving it, right? So when we started selling directly to municipalities, and we sold them the unit and also installed them, then we were much more successful, because the cash flow problem for a small company goes away. And so this is what I was saying, that the BOP has a fundamental problem. Now you could say, well, large companies could go in there and they don't have a problem with finance, right? And P&G's done a lot of BOP things like that, but actually they haven't really made a lot of margin on those products, right? So I think the problem is that large companies, they're not motivated to do a lot of the BOP stuff because it's very long-term, and really the margins are kind of tight, right? So there's a little bit of a paradox where finance, if you just look at finance and the cost of capital, the BOP has some serious challenges. But the cool thing is that not only do we have a successful business now, but if you look at their average size home that we're solving has 4 people in it, and so basically there's 500,000 people that we're preventing from getting cancer as we build a successful business. So that's kind of a cool thing, So it's just a little example about some of the factors you were talking about. Did I answer your question, I hope? All right. Yes?
Thank you very much for your wonderful talk. I am a professor here in Metallurgical Engineering Department. Actually, I got my PhD from Caltech, which was mentioned a few times.
That's okay.
Okay. But I have experiences working with startups since my undergraduate years at Northwestern in material science with Greg Olson, who actually was an MIT alum.
Yeah, Greg was the one that built Sensors Unlimited, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
And Epitax before that, right?
Yeah. many startups.
Yeah.
I interned for 2 years at Quest Tech Innovation, which was later acquired by Apple. Anyways, it's been about 6 years now that I returned back to Thailand and take the role here. And one of the most difficult thing to move innovation forward, if I have found some, is the I think it's the shell of the professorship here. I think our faculty is quite conservative. We are quite limited by a number of KPIs based on papers, administration work, stuff like that. I will stop now.
No,
anyways,
this is good. I think it's important for, I'm not aware of a lot of these things. Well, I'll tell you in a minute what I am aware of in other countries, but it's
Okay.
good to hear about Thailand.
I shall not explain anymore. Sitting right next to the associated dean.
But she needs to hear it. She's going to help you. She's going to help you.
Okay. My question to you is this. What is your time allocation as you would expect for yourself, and also the expectation from MIT, for example, how you would spend time working with your startup, research,
Yes.
papers? It seems like time is, we have 24 hours a day. And
Yeah.
a lot of times the expectation from the faculty is probably not allowing, it's a gray area that professors work for companies, stuff like that. So I think it's one of the biggest challenge that we have here.
No, I think that's right.
amongst other
Yeah.
things.
So just to give you a little background, I was one of the early professors in the SMA. In fact, I taught so SMA is a Singapore MIT Alliance. Some of you may know Singapore spent $500 million over 10 years with MIT, and is spending more now in SMART. And I run 1/5 of their research center, MIT's research center in Singapore. And it's a very common thing, which is that when you set up a traditional organization for education, and education, like I said, is being disrupted anyway, but we have to think about history, right? That, in Singapore, same thing. The faculty, when we first met them, it was very interesting because every faculty, MIT faculty said the same thing, that, number one on MIT's list is research, no matter what they say. So I'll tell you about that in a minute, right? But research is number one, and then teaching, education is number two, and service to the university is number three. And then when we went to Singapore, it's like inverted, right? Service to the university is number one, and then education was number two in the 90s. It was in the 90s, and then there was actually in the 90s in Singapore not that much of forward-looking research like we know today. Now, what's interesting, look at how quickly Singapore transitioned, right, to inverting that. So research is really important there now, and it's dominating their system. Service to university is still very important. That was that hasn't, compared to MIT, there's still a lot of service and things like that faculty do. So it's almost like Singapore raised research in equal to everything else, right? And which means that the faculty actually has no time to do anything outside, right? And but they're working on that too. So I think if you just look at the evolution, things are changing little by little, and it just takes some time, right? And now regarding MIT, I can't really give you, I know the history of MIT, and I don't know why, but out of US universities, I would say it's the most highly decentralized university in the United States, meaning that being the president of MIT is very difficult because you cannot accomplish anything because the professors do what they want to do, right? I don't know how to create that structure somewhere else because even in the United States, it's not too common, right? Now, in that system, it can break down if the professors don't take personal responsibility for serving the needs of the institution with whatever they're doing, right? So, for example, in the old model, it's changing now because the online stuff, but not not yet, it's beginning. But everybody at MIT teaches one class a semester, and they're expected to. And generally, people take that as a personal responsibility, and they do it, right? And I mean, in principle, even that, nobody would probably know if you had someone else teaching it for you half the time. That's highly discouraged, and people generally, have dedication to that. In terms of research, obviously research is the big important thing there. And so that's how young faculty make their mark, and they have to have an impact in the outside world to some degree, and so that's a huge driver. Service to the university is always the thing that frustrates the department head at MIT, because they have to find enough people in between things or whatever to do enough to kind of keep the system going. And so that's the hardest part, is that when you're in charge of a department or you're president of MIT, you have to find this partial free time of faculty, and you have to work with that in order to execute on institutional things, right? So again, it's kind of inverted, where the professors are pretty much doing whatever they want to do, but they do it within an ethical thing, that they don't drop everything, right? So it's kind of like, I guess this unwritten thing where you feel like, as long as I do my commitments that I'm supposed to do for the institution, I can basically do anything else I want. Yeah. So generally that means that the opposing force there is your marriage, right? So MIT is the kind of place that, because that, you could actually, consume all of your life by doing all the opportunities once you're free. Like, there's no shell, basically, right? So there you have to think about balance of life, because, if you want to have a family, everything, people look at me and they go, wow, you started 5 companies, and you're involved in Singapore and all this stuff. And the answer is that, my wife and I have been able to work on that, but you have to limit yourself somewhat if you want to have a balanced life. So that's a good thing and a negative thing at the same time. Basically, you could do whatever you want, but you're limited by other things, out there. And practical time too. I mean, if you do too many things, you can't be good at any of them, right? So, but yeah, I think that look at this innovation model I talk about, right? If you're not able to get out there and do these other things, so the two things enhance each other. I remember I saw this very clearly with Amberwave. When I created that company, the synergy between, what happened in research inside MIT and how the two fed off each other was unbelievable. I mean, I knew it theoretically, because I kind of said, I knew that this had to happen in order to have impact. To do the right research, you have to know what's going on outside. If you're actually participating in a market participant outside, it gives you even more ideas about what's important for the future, right? So, that the amplification of those two things was tremendous. Now, I don't have an answer for you on how you as a system grows, how you change that, but I think hopefully, leadership, I think, is the way that it can happen. I think that you'll be president of this university someday, and that you can fix it, right? Yes?
Before my question, I thank you about this very good presentation. I know that innovation is important for our society, right? But I want to ask you about the old technology that, nowadays we have an iPhone 5, iPhone 4, right? And we throw away iPhone 2 or something like that. I want to ask you how could you manage that much waste? Because I think those kind of abundant stuff gradually increase every day and every year.
So you're talking about the same question about the sustainability things, or is that right? Let me just tell you that, by the way, there's a fantastic thing. If you go online, you can sell your old iPhones, because there's such a huge market in China, India, that they'll buy your whole phone, recondition it, sell it. So the truth is that because it's economically viable, like I was just describing, they're being recycled. So I think what you want to do is, when you have those feelings, you want to quantify them. Right? You want to actually look at world waste, if that's what you're talking about, and see exactly what world waste is from. and look at what the numbers are. And then if you're worried about waste, then you can look at what that big component is.